and SS Consulting team to host all of you all for this book reading ceremony. Just a few words as context before I set off. So this day has been chosen for this event, and a very special occasion. It is also the birthday of Ranjan Acharya, who's one of the people who've been featured in this book, about whom we will talk at length. And it was on this day last year that this book was launched officially in IIM Bangalore. I think Dr. Joseph George has put out a LinkedIn post with the recording, so we have all this information. So it's an honor for us to kind of bring in this unique event to the HR professionals of South India. And one of the reasons I latched on to this opportunity, I would say, was to bring in the fact that in my 20 plus years, I've seen that there is a set of people in HR who go after the depth approach in whatever they do, touch or whatever they do. And that was how I connected to Dr. Joseph some years back. So that's with that as a background. So that's something which I want to bring in. And then let me start off, and this is also the first time, so all the other launches, it is the first time that we are getting to hear from the author. So and I'm honored to have that opportunity and bring it to my friends back here in Kerala and Southern India, and we will spread this across through social media as well. So with that, welcome, with a small note, welcoming and we are honored to have two of the people featured by the author in this book in today's program as well, Vivek sir and George sir. So with a short note of welcome, and all the people who've joined us, thank you for joining. So let me start off by asking the author as to what was the purpose of the why that you had when you were, I know there's a story behind it, so we're eager to hear that. So let us start off on that note, Dr. Vivek.
Okay, maybe one way of responding to that is giving you a pat response. But what I'd like to do is to dedicate this evening almost entirely from my side in a book reading mode. So maybe I have an answer for that question in the book. So I'll just read that. Okay.
Wonderful, wonderful.
So there are two parts that I will read to your question.
Okay.
I kind of anticipated it, so I've marked it here.
Wonderful, thank you.
Years after Ranjan's passing away, Chinu, who's the publisher, is K. Srinivas Murthy, made this request to me by first sharing the misfortune that Ranjan's book could not see the light of day. That means he had commissioned work from Ranjan. And then he placed his option with me, as I was then freed from the trappings of Wipro. By then I'd left Wipro. Okay. The option with a twist on which my head and world turned like a moth to an undying flame. Chinu's specification was what stole my time and attention to this effort. So while this is not the most accurate recall, it surely has the essence, as the good men featured in this book will testify. In my version to them for their consent to this process, and I don't think they heard from me otherwise, here's how I remember Chinu's request. Number one, the book will be in memory of Ranjan and people like him who over the past 5 to 6 decades have made an impact on human resource management in India. Two,
wow.
The people featured in the book will not have made impact to HR practices by virtue of being solely consultants, neither will they be academicians. Three, they will be practitioner managers within their firms who by dint of effort and dedication to their cause uplifted not only the profession, but also the institutions they were part of. And number four was that this will not be done without the blessings of Ranjan's wife, Lakshmi Acharya. Sure enough, I took this idea to Mrs. Acharya, and her consent was swift, personable, but that's how it began. And just to speak a little deeper to your question, actually, this comes out from a need quite different from the need to compensate for the elusiveness of certain personalities. As an interviewee in the process of this book mentioned to me, people in organizations today are rarely rewarded for avoiding errors or preventing damage from occurring. In general, organizations celebrate solutions to problems. They don't reward people who prevent problems from occurring or those who go beyond to make substantial savings from the qualification and avoidance of risks not easily apparent. So the impact of these people that they've had on several others is not celebrated because they do not brag or announce the reasons for being who they are or how they go about weaving their magic or art. They stay resilient even amidst untold struggles to retain fidelity to their inner authentic lives. Thus, there's so much to learn from their lives. So you can see that in some way I've responded to your question from the book.
Wonderful, wonderful. That's great. I mean, in fact, while you were saying this, this latched on to this thought about this whole, I've been given this task, I take it as a task and an honor, I would say, as being an influencer for the HR folks. And I've been having a kind of a close-in look towards the scene of the last 5 years. And what you mentioned in the book is become kind of clearer to me as I go around. And by the way, Dr. Joseph himself is part of the SHRM list of top 20 influencers, and which came out last year. So going through this whole scene for the last 5 years from the US itself, SHRM US was the first one who got me in. I realized that whole elusiveness that you mentioned has also become the reason for a lot of, let's say, new students or learners within HR to take a lot of, they have to take a lot of effort to reach some of these people because they generally are people who are, okay, they want to be away and okay, they're fine, they won't be reflecting in thoughts. But if you ask them these questions, that is when all these gems start coming out. And I'm hoping that we would be able to do that. And I'm really glad that we have Vivek sir and George sir with us today, and you, of course, as the author. So with that note, maybe, of course, shall we begin the session from your end? The first part, over to you, Doctor. So I'll keenly listen and then join in and then bring in the others as well.
Yeah, so hopefully what I'll kind of prefer as a format is that I'll read a section from each chapter, because each chapter is devoted to a profile.
Okay.
And then maybe I'll pause and we'll invite people to chat their way into the Zoom chat box.
Correct.
In the sense that as I'm reading, they may have reflections or certain kind of, let's say, thoughts and feelings about what they're listening. And if they jot that into the box, maybe you'll have cues to take the session further. So I invite the audience to actively participate in that sense. And then maybe after a particular reading, we can then pause and check if we need to respond to some of those issues. Then I'll go to the next one. Is that okay?
Wonderful.
All right.
Great.
So since the book is in memory of Ranjan, I'll begin with the piece on Ranjan, but I think it's useful just to read one para that Mr. Premji wrote as some kind of a reflection regarding this work. So I'll just put that first and then read the Ranjan's chapter, and then maybe you can see what kind of chats have come in. Okay.
Sure.
So this is Mr. Premji's reflections. I'm reading just one para. Beyond his professional accomplishments, Ranjan was an exemplary human being, a man of sharp wit and creativity. He could lighten up a situation with his famed humor without for a moment taking anything away from the seriousness of the subject. He was a wonderful storyteller, and no Wipro get-togethers would be complete without Ranjan's repertoire of Wipro stories. In his own subtle way, he was also coaching the audience on the gentle art of storytelling. Ranjan was a person full of ideas, and he was very generous in sharing it with whoever he could help. He was the perfect coach. He mentored many without making them realize he was doing so. To me personally, Ranjan was someone who willingly and every time put Wipro's interests ahead of his own. This needs a certain maturity and character which is not easy to find.
Wow.
I'm inviting readers to actually get the book to see what else Mr. Premji has said on it. But otherwise, without further ado, I know time is something that we must be mindful of. I'd like to read a certain section which speaks to some of the values Ranjan represents and therefore is shared by many of the people featured in the book.
Okay.
So the chapter on Ranjan Acharya is entitled The Evergreen Synesthete. And synesthesia is a neurological phenomenon that if one activates a particular sense, another sense interprets it in a different way. Say, if you see a color, you might actually be invoked on a number. Or if you smell a taste, something like that. Okay? And Ranjan had that in plenty. Music was one way he would compensate for many other readings, etc. Anyway, so here's something I'm reading out.
Please.
Born on 27th November 1957, Ranjan shared the date continuum, but not the year, with Kayuma Shroff, Kayo. Kayo's birthday being on 26th November, their birthday is often celebrated together at Wipro's corporate HRD. Kayo was long associated with class and finesse to Wipro's CHRD training sessions. Neither, however, pretended to be the other on astrological or zodiac attributes. Ranjan in his rooted Indianized version of intellect, and Kayo in his unapologetically westernized training presence. In this relationship, there was mutually accommodating authenticity. The Jamshedpur raised to-be tattoo artist, Kayo was a no-holds-barred trainer with a behaviorist philosophy, lacing hair-raising humor to break learners from their conventional dispositions in behavior. Ranjan, on the other hand, had a philosophical humanist approach, confident in his unfolding of a famed procedure that enlisted the learner's inquiry in an intuitive emergence like a genie from eternal goodness. Kayo's facilitation had a procedural closure as in a product manual. It was simplified, elegantly so, and in methods reduced for the learner's application. Ranjan gave no best way or the way. However, he held up relevant possibilities just beyond the grasp of the learner, but near enough to value it. Ranjan's presence had a generative, if not a regenerative impact on those he engaged with, including Kayo. Kayo's social side had a counselor in him. With that cognitive empathy and the power of service to back it, Ranjan enlisted Kayo to launch what has been one of the most giving offerings from the corporate HRD tables, known as Mitra, a friend. Wipro's counseling enlisted willing service volunteers who would go through a specified coursework to qualify as a counselor whom Wipro employees could reach out to. Many a suicide, relational quandary at home, and related issues were nipped in the bud amid the frenzy with which business focus outstripped human capacity to endear others to the cause of work itself. This was also a philosophical imprint from Ranjan's point of view. Apart from addressing ethical concerns, Ranjan also ensured the initiative had a psychological safety zone in which the developmental dimension or the nurturance stroke shone through the despairing moments that employees went through in hopeless helplessness. That was his watch in design, even as he was giving the operational leadership to Kayo and his wonderful team of volunteers chosen from over 200 applicants who had to testify natural orientations in themselves by giving account of compassionate deeds in their lives. Besides, the program emphasized that the volunteers would not be from HR roles, and hence beneficiaries need not doubt their privacy being transgressed in performance evaluation or employee record documentation. That's my reading from Ranjan's chapter.
Wow. So at this moment, if you permit, Doctor, I want to bring into the audience before I ask in some of them. I'm sure they'll be thinking and some of my, very brief interactions. And thanks, you have also interacted with George sir as well. So it was during my first third job in the corporate. I think after Marico joined Wipro, and we had to design a program, an experiential learning program for the WCCLG folks, sales team. And Srikanth had taken me that we were discussing and said, oh, Ranjan is here, so why don't we go to him and meet him? And the way he, and as he was reading right now, I could kind of personify a lot of those things. And I was about 4 years into the industry and complete novice in this HR, in this people around. Srikanth himself is a very senior person. So he takes me in and introduces me as somebody who's coming from here, Symbiosis, Marico, and all the stuff. And he acknowledged and he kept me on in their discussions, including the jokes that they would otherwise explain. He made sure that I also understood the jokes. In fact, some of those things were on very, very serious level stuff. And it's amazing that how, I think we have Vinesh also on this call, who's an ex-Wipro. I don't know if he was commenting, and maybe we can get to hear from him as well on his reflections on this. I was kind of heartbroken when I realized I would not be able to interact with Ranjan long, because I left Wipro and then when I got back, or when I checked back later, we lost him. So this is it is with that kind of, so I consider it a very special honor for me to kind of even discussing this now with this group of people, and for the future HR leaders of South India and the entire world to know that there were people in India who has kind of walked this path and in an exemplary manner. So with that, let me invite our attendees to bring in their views on the chat box, or if you can raise your hand on the, we are a smaller group, so we can open the mute piece for you all, and you all can talk. Maybe you raise your hand and I'll unmute so that there'll be some bit of an order, so otherwise we might all get some disturbances.
And Vinesh has physically raised his hand, so.
Oh, he has? Okay. Vinesh is of course the host, so I made him co-host, so he can bring it up.
Yeah. I was very happy to hear about MIT, because personally I have been involved in Wipro as a MIT for about 14 years.
Wow.
And I have closely worked with both Kayo and in fact late Ranjan's wife. We worked together as part of MIT, and that was one of the most amazing experiences that I have when I think about Wipro. And that's what I thought I'll share regarding this initiative that Ranjan brought in, and I was very happy to be part of it. Thank you.
And imagine now with all the pandemic pieces now, and the whole wellness and counseling and all this kind of, I got at least 2 calls over the last week requesting for connection with like counselors and clinical counseling, and from all across spectrum of people. I mean, every 2 or 3 days, I keep getting these things from companies in Kerala to connect them to people in this thing. So imagine somebody doing it in the early 2000. So let's hear if, the attendees can unmute themselves and join in their reflection, because the whole idea is to bring in, once you get to hear the author going through the sections, you can participate in the discussions on the chat box, or even talk of your views on what you've heard.
Yeah, I read a very short section, and it's for the audience to kind of express what is evoked in them. But otherwise, the book is covering the lifespan of these profiles. So if there's something from that order that you'd like to ask as complementary to the reading, which gives a more fuller picture, that's a question we can take now before I go on to another profile. The book is replete with a lot of references across the length of these people's lives. So any question that I might respond to now, especially because it's Ranjan.
I have some questions coming up. Let me see if there are folks joining in. Okay. Okay, Vivek sir has a question. He's saying you mentioned that he put organization before himself. And
yeah,
how does one get to people doing it?
Yeah, so this was Mr. Premji's special mention of Ranjan. Okay, and this, I think it's a very special bond between the two that they developed over the years. And maybe one way to put it is that Ranjan had a way of explaining this. I'll give two references as kind of response, Vivek sir. One, Ranjan would explain to employees that there are two kinds of values that run through in corporate life. One is the espoused values, which we know is kind of a Chris Agris point of view, that the company wants the world to believe that this is what we follow. And the other is the operational values, which is actually Ranjan's terminology for what Agris would say values in use. And he says, and Ranjan would say that it is the operational values from which employees learn. They don't learn from what's on the wall. What's the value in operation? That's what people learn from. And he would give ample credit to Mr. Premji's simplicity and honesty, which he would like to emulate himself. And to that extent, Mr. Premji may have felt that there is a reciprocation which is unparalleled from Ranjan. And that's how maybe Mr. Patwardhan, that's how Ranjan became an exemplar for others. This is one. I'll give you a very simple example, but it was from a more difficult moment that Ranjan and I have experienced together, which of course I didn't have space for in the book. So there was a very, what can I say, delicate kind of request from Mr. Premji that after Mr. Vivek Paul left, Mr. Premji took charge almost operationally of whatever is happening. And then suddenly he's exposed to the elements of what's happening. And then he felt that there needed to be a team intervention at the very top. So he asked Mr. Ranjan Acharya to design an intervention. And Mr. Acharya was thinking that perhaps this is one of many wishes that Mr. Premji has, and he may not be very serious about it. So he decided not to act on it immediately, but he did sound it out to me saying that we got to put out something. And then I was in his room coincidentally when Mr. Premji calls on his intercom. And he lifted the phone and the inquiry was about, so what are you doing about the team intervention? And suddenly Mr. Acharya gets this kind of feeling that, oh gosh, he's really serious about it. And the non-verbals is what was interesting to observe. Ranjan actually got up and he said, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. He put the phone down. That was the kind of reverence and example that the relationship held together. And then he says, there's no going back now. We got to design. Let's continue the conversation on this. So I don't know if that explains in some part, Mr. Patwardhan, as to how does one get to do. So this is the kind of mutuality that people share when they speak from authentic space. I'll say that much and reserve my case.
Yeah, I think this is very well explained. As somebody said, there is always some kind of not communication, but a communion between the mentor and the mentee, and the mentee instinctively understands what is demanded of him, or what messages are coming to him. So we see that in action here. A wonderful experience, a wonderful example, sir.
Yeah, and coincidentally, that intervention, we were able to hold the senior management of Wipro for 2 days without them anxious about what's happening on the business front. And it went so well that then senior management across different business units said, no, we need more of these in our own units. So that's how it went.
So the question I had was around this whole learning space, Doctor. So how did you see Ranjan as a designer on learning? If you can bring in your pieces around, because that's one of the first things I saw him do for me. And of course, I couldn't do much because after that I kind of moved out, and so something which I missed. I wanted to kind of maybe reminisce, and hence this question. And you've been with him for like many years. You've been good friends.
So I think you could say that Dilip Ranjekar would say that Ranjan is a multifaceted person, not exactly multidisciplinary. I think that's partly explaining the kind of variety of interests Ranjan kept, and he would learn from many avenues of life, whether it was from culinary tastes to reading habits and variety of things. And that's how he would engage with learning. So, for example, not many may know that because he was from MBA marketing, he approached HR with a pristine, unspoiled curiosity. So he gave many originals to Wipro. So, for example, when the whole world was going to, the conventional SHL, occupational personality questionnaire, or other kind of things in the market, he learned what it meant to understand measurement. And he brought a completely new tool to Wipro, which was the preferences and perceptions inventory, or the PAPI, because he felt that when he went to the fundamentals, it was actually more consistent with what is now coming across as a situation, person, interaction measurement, and not merely by type and not merely by trait. And that became the mainstay for Wipro's leadership development thereafter.
Yes, I remember. Yes.
And he had the ability to intellectually explain this to Dilip. And that's how it came. So he had a way of getting into the depth. Okay, so I might explain that a little differently later, but otherwise this is one. Another one was music. For example, let me just read a bit of what his musical guru, Dr. Nagaraj Rao Havaldar, said about him. Okay, so you see, he narrated the guru-shishya relationship, and I'm straying a little bit from your timeline, but let me see if this explains the learning and development piece. So you see, Nagaraj Rao Havaldar's guru was Pandit Panchakshari Swami Matigati. This is a Dharwad tradition, Hindustani classical. Right? And this man's guru was Mallikarjun Mansoor. Okay? So now, as these two people, Matigati and Mallikarjun, were walking to a concert, within 5 minutes, Matigati notices that his guru's dhoti had a big hole. He was in dilemma whether to disclose to the guru, Mansoor. My Guruji Matigati gathered the courage to tell him anyway. After 25 years of a guru-shishya relationship, Pandit Mansoor replied, as if expecting such a question from his disciple, Panchakshari, tell me, who will sing, the dhoti or I, the singer? My guru responded, the singer. Then what's the worry? Let's just fold the dhoti to tie a knot to cover the hole and carry on to the concert. And he gave an immortal concert. The above episode reveals to us three dimensions. Firstly, there are constraints in a guru-shishya relationship. You contrast it now between Ranjan's relationship with me and that of my guru with his guru. Secondly, the economic status of the musician. In an age where India sends satellites to space and celebrities conduct marriages in Italy, who cares for traditional musicians or artists? And thirdly, about priorities in life. What's in focus? That's most important. If somebody compliments you for a wonderful dress after a concert, then they are not bothered about the music. It's a value-related focus. Not that you should wear an untidy dress to stress the value. I think that's what Ranjan brought through even to the profession. So I hope you sense that Ranjan learned from various sources and very complex. Yeah.
Thank you. I think in the interest of time, we'll move ahead to the next section. I know we have interactions as well. I know more people will join as well. So
I deliberately read that so that people see how multifaceted a life history can be. And it takes years to get to the bottom of somebody, especially when a person has passed away. And I'm really grateful to all the people who contributed with their sense of the man and things like that.
Wonderful.
Okay, with your permission, I'd like to go to the next profile. I'm skipping the sequence in the book. Mr. Patwardhan, I'm going to read from the chapter on you now.
Very nice.
Okay. So Mr. Patwardhan, for others, he was
Thank you.
Very long, the head of HR at Asian Paints, and he spent more than 2 decades at that company. So I'm going to read from the chapter on him. It's called The Caress of Justice. So for me, Mr. Patwardhan is the caress of justice. So let me read the section and you can get a sense of that. So this is in conversational mode. And so I'm going to ask the question in the chapter. It says, so what was the element of surprise? What took away or added to the surprise when a good soldier, you went and announced the intent of management? And Mr. Patwardhan is responding. People think that there will be a strike, then there will be a settlement, and everybody will come back happily. In practice, however, it does not happen. And there is a mass reduction of manpower numbers coming up. If there is this mass reduction of manpower numbers coming up, then you definitely need to tell people. If you don't, then workers will feel, do char logon ki naukri jayegi, a few people, maybe 2 or 4 will lose their jobs, but the strike will end. I think we had 150 surplus workers before the strike, and we removed 104 people. After the strike, I started settling their cases. We offered what was fairly a good compensation at that time. And we came in for much criticism within the organization. People said, on one side, you're having a strike. On the other side, you're throwing money away. But I saw a terrible misery on the other side. I can write novels on that with so much masala. Here is an example. There was one worker, a nice, simple soul, who lost his job among those 104. He was from Dharwad, Karnataka. After he was sacked, he started buying children's clothes and selling those in Dharwad. He had set up a small shop. Once there was a storm in Dharwad and a tree fell on his shop. He lost his stock and lost everything with it. That man lost his mental balance. He could not take so much. He was a simple, nice worker. He was not involved in anything, but things started hitting people. I talked to my boss. See what is happening. We have removed over 100 people, but this is terrible. One huge learning was that you may be magnanimous as management, but ultimately workers will hold you responsible for their state of affairs, whether it is of your making or not. That stayed with me because, you are the management and you're supposed to be in charge. But somewhere deep down, workers feel that management ought to have changed the course of events. Management lost substantial amount of sales, and in the strike, there's enormous loss to the workers also. But when the strike ended, our directors, my boss, and others went to the shop floor meeting, all workers. They were shaking hands, talking to them, and doing something to help out. A letter was also written to all workers individually, essentially saying, let bygones be bygones. Let us start everything afresh. But some scars remain. I'll stop here.
Okay.
Any comments coming up?
See, I think if we interact on this, we can go on forever. And I want to kind of get Vivek's view on this from one perspective. So I think the example that you mentioned and the author read out, how do you see it play on now with what has happened in our own? I know it might get into a controversial area, but I think your views on what India saw in this between March and May this year, and how much can maybe how can we prepare leadership in these companies like you've done to kind of be aware, and that is one part, and also where are such material available? Like, for people, of course, that is being people is one piece which I would strongly recommend to all. But are there in your from the vantage point, do you see certain routes that HR professionals can take to equip themselves for such role playing capabilities?
Yeah, quite a deep question, Anish. And I hope I will be able to answer that. But as we all know, there are certain business interests and there are certain people interests. Now, people are thinking that I should get good salary so that I can lead a good life, provide a good life to my wife and children. Okay, provide them good education. That is the purpose for which he takes up a job. And there is an organization which must thrive. Okay, there are points where the two can start clashing. Okay, and it is at this juncture, I think whether you are HR leader or managing director or CEO or whatever, forget the designation, but the people who influence decisions have to understand that the trick is in balancing. The trick is not taking lopsided views. Okay, maybe you will make tons of profit by focusing on business interest, but that will not help you build a great culture. So the management, as I understand, is all about balancing different interests. Okay, we need to do that, and in order to do that, we have to ask ourselves, because the business interest can be handled easily. There are facts, data, everything right in front of you, and with SAP it can be obtained instantly. But when it comes to people, you have to look inward, is what I feel, and also listen to people, but mainly look inward and ask how I would like to be treated under certain circumstances like this. Okay. And that generally provides the guideline. So there are people during from March lockdown who have paid salaries. There are people who have sat down with workers and said, see, we can't really afford, but I will still pay you half month's salary and let things improve. I will see if I can pay the remaining amount when the things improve. But as on date, please accept half. And people have accepted that. I mean, people accept realities, but the trick is in conversation. Open conversation. And the trouble is that we have lost the art of conversation. That is the main.
That's a sad part.
Is your leader capable of striking a good, meaningful conversation? Is the question.
Wonderful. Thank you, sir. Thank you for.
I hope I have answered your question.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think we have okay. We have a comment from Sri Kumar sir. Maybe you want to. I can unmute Sri Kumar sir to maybe express his views on this. Sri Kumar sir.
Yeah, I have some connectivity issues. Actually, shall I? Am I
We
audible?
can hear you, sir.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Actually, there's a big balancing between what is just and unjust. Is a question which is actually a point which is an internal conflict throughout HR professionals' mind. If is very hard and core to himself first. Quite often, what my predecessor has said, like you're more enamored by your job title, glamour, and the society, and business cards, and travel, and all that. This takes a second listen. But if you're really sensitizing the people, especially the people down in the grassroots level, I think it's something which is thing which has to be an essential requirement for HR professionals of today. I think if because quite often we tend to incline towards pleasing the management, or we don't cultivate a channel of freely expressing our view and then coming to a business decision. That first part is missing because possibly we also lack what is called conviction and also our own opinion on certain things. I repeat the word of opinion as a person has to develop as a professional. That's what I humbly like to share with us. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Sri Kumar sir.
Yeah. Can I take 2
Please,
seconds
please.
before you move on?
Please.
Okay. Mr. Sri Kumar has used the word justice. I just want to tell that very often justice involves a process of judgment, and in that goes your values. This is why what you think as a justice is not my concept of justice. Okay. So it's not interpreting a law, it's bringing our own values in it, and that's where clashes start happening even within among managers. So a good leader needs to reconcile all this and take stance. It's easy said than done.
Yes. Thank you, Vivek sir. Doctor, if we can, I know I'm also looking at the time aspect.
Yeah, it's fine. So I might just add that these conceptions of justice that Mr. Patwardhan just spoke about is laced through his chapter, and he learns from various kind of readings himself, like Ranjan, and that's a commonality. You'll find an interpretation of how a pardon was given to a suicide bomber on a Korean plane, to something that happened in English jurisprudence, and then how he contextualizes it in India. And that's the beauty of his disclosures for this process of the book. And I'm trying, of course, I'm not a salesperson, but I'm trying to expand on this point of justice and what he just mentioned about how do you embody that value in you. And that's an invitation to readers. Please pick this book. See, this book is like 6 books in one. So you might want to keep, you might want to read, 1 book a week kind of thing if you want to read it in one go, but it's really multifarious in that sense. Yeah.
And one person itself is a kind of a diverse and kind of, yes. I would say, and there's a word which I'm not able to get about, like the Picasso, like, Da Vinci, like, so those multi-faceted and all. So that means it is various components. So I'm tempted to ask another question to Vivek sir, but maybe we'll see if anybody else has one, and of course I can reach out to him separately as well. Okay. Let's see if we can, because it's about learning, sir. I mean, okay, let me take that. So I have in the last 7 to 8 years or so, after I got in touch with Dr. Joseph, and then through Twitter, I get to some of your articles. So, and I've forwarded some of them to my circle here, and especially around this employee relations spaces. So
Thank you.
What is, I mean, in all my question to you is, how do you, or how can you kind of guide somebody who's in the first maybe 10 years of his or her career in this employee relations? So, to me, let's say HR, because it's all the same for me. What would you take as a kind of a path to follow to be able to aware of all these nuances, especially with the labor codes coming in right now? So
Yeah.
your words.
So I know time is short, so I will mention just 2 or 3 points.
Please,
First
please.
thing is, we have to focus on industrial relations, and there is a word called relations. It is not conflicts. When we talk of industrial relations, we actually think conflicts. Okay. But we have to understand how to build relationships, and relationships can be built only proactively. I mean, those who have built up relationships in a masterly way have been proactive in building the relationships. Now, relationship building is relegated to Salesforce in the organizations, isn't it? Customer relationships. But why not? What about industrial relationship? It's not conflict. You have to focus on relationships. Okay. Second part, I would say, is that here the other party first is a golden rule taught in the college. Okay. That needs to be practiced. It's not easy to practice, but that needs to be practiced, and it is to be practiced with empathy. So these are 2 things I will mention about,
Thank you, Vivek sir. Yeah. I think been great, and I'm really looking forward to connecting more on with you again, and then with the book once again. So thank you, and Doctor, if you can, let's move to the next part of the.
Yes. Piece. So just to make a connection piece here, for industrial relations piece, read also a chapter by George Menezes, who is departed. Luckily, I got everything I needed for this chapter before he passed away, and he had just this thing that, can you bring the book out soon? And he knew he had a premonition. But the reason I mention is that he led all of industrial relations, HRD, administration, all of that in Hext, which is a pharmaceutical company in those days. 25 years, not a single day lost to strike. So if you'd like to know that approach to industrial relations, do read that chapter.
Amazing, amazing. And just the kind of people you profiled are just
yes,
beyond.
And in the days of militant trade unionism. So that's why I'm making mention.
And that too in place where it happened. It is like
yes. So I'm now going to read a chapter extract from Mr. Kunnath's chapter, and I call him the radical humanist. He was humanist. Like, yes. And he was sporting enough for me to kind of label him so. So I'm going to read something here, and it speaks to one of the themes you're trying to bring out, learning, learning, learning. So I hope this is a good one for you. So I'm straight away reading what he said in response to a question.
Okay.
One of the experiments I attempted was in a division of a large organization in the Mahindra Group. This was spun off as a fully owned independent subsidiary of the larger entity. The MD said he wanted a different structure, a different process for performance review, a different way of running the organization, one with fewer layers than the typical corporate organization. My response was, let's stop training first. He was alarmed. This was in 1999. He asked, how can you do that? I replied, do you want a learning organization? Leave that to me. This was for about 150 people, a small size experiment to begin with. We created only 4 levels of open appraisal process without forced conclusions. Training connotes an image that you have a circus man in the tent and he can whip and train the animals. But we are not that way. Training is conditioning people. It is not done to liberate. In those days, the term learning and development was not common. I remember it was not used then. When I created the presentation for this experiment, I called it L&D. Each employee had to have a form called My Learning Needs. Each form had 5 or 6 questions. What do I need to learn to function effectively on my job? What action would I take for it? How will I go ahead? Everything was about how will I take responsibility for my learning. Only the last question was reserved for training or HR. That question was, what kind of support do you need from your boss, organization, or HR? First, there was uproar from more experienced people with more than 20 years of work experience. People said, HR does not want to do their job, so they're doing this. I said, sorry, but we are going to go through this process. So I began with the heads of department and had a talk. I told them, conventionally, we establish a calendar to be circulated at the beginning of the year, and HR organizes the program as scheduled dates approach. HR puts pressure on heads of departments to send people to fill the classroom. So what do? You depute, quote unquote, spare people for the program. If you were one of them, would you be happy sitting in the classroom? They said no. You have the answer for why I'm taking this approach, I replied. After the first year, there was enthusiasm. At my farewell, the MD said that he was scared about training, but he was relieved that it was I who was in charge as the desired results were achieved after the new system was implemented. It has to be pull, not push. At the meeting, I asked the question, tell me, whose needs are you accomplishing with your offerings? He was shocked and said that nobody ever asked him that question, as it was an offering from the trainer's model. Most consultants offer concepts that are being pushed down unwilling participants' throats.
Yeah.
I stop here.
Okay. It's very, very interesting part. I would okay. Let me ask that question before coming on to this part. Then to George sir. So, how was it? How did it feel when the author reached out to you, sir, to be profiling yourself? What would like to hear your.
Please unmute yourself, George.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I hope you could hear me well, right, sir?
Yeah, I heard you.
Okay, great. My voice has some issues here, and I'm between two of these. So, please go ahead, sir.
To be honest on that, the first step was a different approach. Joseph came and told me, this is a mandate. I have to write a book, and I need to meet some people. So, do you know some? Can you recommend some people?
Okay.
So I recommended a couple of names, and he has approached them, interviewed them. Okay. And after some time, he comes back to me and says, I think you need to be on that team also. So I said, it depends on, if you see, I'm ready. I can, if I fit in there, that's fine. So then that's where it happened. So I was happy to express myself. So this was also very, I could give total authentic expression of myself, how I felt, both in the way I worked and the way I lived.
Okay. So thank you, sir, for explaining. And let me bring in my, see, it was through the author that we both met. And right. We met, I think, first on WhatsApp, and then he connected us. And then during my travel to Kozhikode, right. I've had, and that week after I met you, in fact, people started asking me what has happened. I said, see, so my response to them was, see, I've been thinking that a lot of these things that I am supposed to learn about HR also come from maybe Westerners or maybe Dave Ulrichs of the world, or all the books that we taught in Sindhi all came from the people written by people who are in Europe or in the US. And then I spent maybe, I think we had dinner that evening. The whole piece was it was so surprising and amazing feeling to know that there is somebody who's gone through all this and has actually created results. I was getting the same feeling again now as Doctor was, the author was reading it. So I just hope in Kerala there are enough ways where I can contribute to getting this across to the rest of the state, and I'm sure they'll be really, really proud through this. So with this, I would also like to take the same question. I'll come back to George sir on this. Can I ask the same question to Vivek sir as well? How did you feel being profiled, or what when Dr. Joseph reached out on maybe your thoughts and feelings, so we can get to hear from the horse's mouth, Vivek sir. Thank you, George sir, for giving them.
Okay, I would, you ask him that question. After that, I would want to say something more on the learning thing he is talking about. So you finished that?
I will come back, sir.
Yeah. So when I mean, Mr. Joseph approached me, I was actually startled. I mean, who on this earth would like to talk to me about my career and things like that? Okay, so I mean, I was just curious, and I went on speaking, but I never knew that he is going to print the whole interview. I thought that it will be about 2 pages or something.
Okay.
So it was interesting. It was interesting.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, sir. For George sir, please. I'm sorry to have kind of broken the flow. I did so. We'll come back and hear your views.
So yesterday we were just chatting, and then I suddenly thought of, I said, what need to be, because there is a context change since we were interviewed maybe 8 years ago. This interviews happened, and then we didn't know the future, what it is today.
Yeah.
Though there was a question that how do you visualize the future of HR? What's your perspectives? And so looking at the way we, like for example, current scenario, working from home and what we are doing right now.
Yeah.
It's about looking at one question for the audience or any, including me, is to see, am I aware of the mindset from where I am operating all the time? That's and mindset is and that is the perspective from where we are trying to solve or do things. Unless I am willing to address that, whatever else I'm doing is not going to work. So the other is connected to that is the paradigms in which we are operating. And the difference between the two is mindset is to do with myself, the world views I hold, which I carry within myself. Whereas paradigms are larger. There could be a cultural paradigm, a political paradigm, or an organizational paradigm, all kinds of different large systems, that they are paradigms. So if I am trying to bring about a change in the paradigm, I cannot do that until the mindset is addressed. Otherwise, it's all going away. And talking about learning, I would say we have ideas, we have knowledge, we have insight. That's only the beginning or the step towards learning. It's not learning. I have an insight, it's not learning. I have an idea, it's not learning. Learning is when I am putting that insight, integrate that insight into action. I take my idea into action with awareness, not habitually. If I do a habitual process, there's no learning there. It's an awareness. With awareness, I take my ideas and insight into action. And that is learning. And
with awareness, you take your ideas and insight into action. Okay.
When I act, I'm aware I'm doing that. I'm implementing that idea. I'm integrating that idea into my life, in my work situation, my life situation. And this is the constant move that I need to do with learning.
Wow.
The critical question is also, who is responsible for my learning? And very often people think that, my employer has to, provide learning, and then we are on the wrong track. Okay, so I have to hold myself responsible for my own learning. And when that realization comes, I think we cross a big bridge.
So when you say that, yes, and add to that, I think it's also mentioned in my remark in the book about this is about performance. We have all kinds of things talked about performance and performance review processes. Changes are happening, and particularly in today's context, people are working from home. There's no question of sitting behind somebody and say, "Have you done it?" So it is about creating a pride in my work. That means HR need to look at and say, what is that I can do or facilitate so that people take total responsibility for their performance and they are proud of their performance. And this is what is going to change the performance of the organization. Not by monitoring, controlling, but in freedom, the responsibility happens. And people need to be prepared to take responsibility and exercise freedom. That's a climate we need to have.
Wonderful, wonderful. So Srijit has a question or a comment. Okay, Srijit, you want to unmute yourself and take this? 1 second. Srijit, yes.
Thank you, Anish. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. Reason I have my professor here, George sir, who's teaching me in my master's program, and his gurus whom we embody and look up to, Vivek sir, George sir here. I totally agree to what George sir just now and Vivek sir added also. Was there somebody else speaking?
Go ahead.
I was just trying to say that all the westernized side of things that you rightly pointed out, Anish. I was just reflecting on that when George sir was speaking. The biggest learning for me here, and it's a happy moment for me, right? As a concept, learning organization came in an HBR article in '93. It was later commercialized by a Big Four firm in 2010s, and then we have George sir who has implemented it successfully in '99. But we did not know about him till the book came out. So I'm just looking at the gamut of things that has been happening around, and we are not aware. It's not like we don't know about it. There's been people who've been doing this. And personally, this is my opinion that we used to have a lot of discussions, George sir and I, when he used to give us lectures in class, that in our settings, right, in India, wherein diversity is everywhere. You pick on one parameter that becomes that adds on to your diversity. We always have inherent practices which we are not aware. I mean, until and unless we are aware of it, and now we are trying to compare it with something that is coming from the Western philosophy. Are we appreciating what we are having? Are we understanding what we are having is the bigger question that I have. So, George sir, thank you so very much for the insights. Totally moved.
Thank you, Srijit, for your views and then making it lively for us and helping us connect to some of these things better.
Thank you, Anish. Thanks.
Over to Dr. Joseph.
I'm now going to read from a profile who's the youngest among the six, and it's a different kind of reading, but hopefully it will strike conversation for a bit. And then, Anish, if you accord me time, I'll also like to read a little bit from my epilogue after that. So you can guide me on the timeline. So this is from the chapter on Dr. Pallab Bandhopadhyay. He began his career in NDDB and ended his career in Citrix. But this is a different thing that I'm asking him about the future of HR in India. And that's what I'm going to read because he gives it quite uniquely. I ask him, what concerns do you have today about the future of the profession, especially in light of your beliefs regarding process skills and purpose orientation? The way I see it, there is a huge sense of powerlessness in HR leaders today. One reason is the matrix culture is wrongly implemented, where control is the motive. There may be some situations where certain ratios matter to look at HR efficacy. That's important, no doubt. My hypothesis is that even in startup organizations, technology comes in the way of building institutions. Using technology for developing people without being clear about the end goal has created problems in India. I'm convinced that technology has to be used to put people at ease. Can people hold a dialogue with the help of technology? There's no cover for people anymore if HR capability for dialogue is missing. Look at what happens in nuclear family situations. Both young parents, young siblings are losing psychological and social depth. Then there's delayering and destructuring. M&As are becoming the order of the day. People are losing the human touch in building relationships, and yet their aspirations are so high. The world's actually looking for people who can empathize, people who can offer their shoulders to others when they are in distress. Even if they can smile when they offer their shoulders and offer counseling for youngsters entering the workforce, it helps. But technology should not rob you of your capabilities to have an honest dialogue with people. That's a bad dependency. Then I ask, I've read a beautiful sentence sometime recently. The opposite of addiction is actually connection. Pallab says, very interesting. That's what it is. The need is there. Why is social media so popular today? Because you want to connect. That's all right. But social media cannot substitute man's emotional needs. If technology is placed on the upper hand, the effect can be perverse. You may use technology to make meaning, like in Ariana Huffington's book, Thrive. If you have not read it, read it. The story is about a time when she faints and gets admitted to a hospital. After a series of tests there and sitting there after working long hours, she realizes she needs a break. But she experiences all kinds of apprehensions. The same that a mid-career executive in India feels while undergoing annual medical checkups. The tests indicate she does not have any medical issues, but she's suffering sheer exhaustion from overwork. Thrive is a beautiful book. It talks about sheer exhaustion from overwork. It talks about impact of work on a careerist. A bestseller, it's full of research data about these dehumanizing processes around us. Some of them are quite scary. There is a danger lurking in the profession then? That's what I ask. Yes. The biggest trouble is the mismatch between aspiration and competency in younger generations.
Aspiration and confidence. Wow. Wonderful.
I'm afraid Dr. Pallab must be busy this evening, but I thought I'd place this for the audience today.
Wonderful, wonderful. I think very interesting scope of the way where it is covered, no, when with his career starting in NDDB, and then again diversity is just kind of personified, if I can say.
Just to add, this gentleman has seen 25 mergers and acquisitions in his career.
Oh my God. Amazing. Look at the myriad of emotions it's having had to work with.
May I also add, they shifted from Anand to Bangalore because they discovered that their daughter had Asperger's syndrome. It's a particular kind of learning difficulty kind of thing. They shifted here. Within a few years, he lost his wife. And he brought up his daughter along with this intensity of professional struggle. So that's the man. Please read his book. I mean, please read the book just to know what it takes to serve and yet thrive through crisis.
Amazing. The profile that you've done, it's amazing. See, just I think 2 weeks back, I was listening to this podcast with Brené Brown had with Ron Beecher about the way history and how we can learn from history and how powerful it can be. And to me, whatever I've seen in the last hour plus is about the way you have kind of curated that kind of learning content for all of us as HR professionals and business professionals. And the pride to know that it has all happened and it's been happening in our country. So I can see Ajesh there. Ajesh would like to bring you on for some of your thoughts if you want. I heard Anil sir as well wanted to maybe bring in Anil sir and Ajesh. 1 second. Okay. Where is Ajesh? Okay. Ajesh. Yes.
Thank you.
Ajesh.
Yeah. Thank you, Anush. It's a
You're still in office.
Yeah, still I'm in office.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, as Joseph sir described, thriving through the crisis. I was going through the comments also that what is the importance of reading biographies. So I was thinking on that. What is the importance of reading biographies? I think Vivek sir put a comment on the chat box. How we see it, because when we are reading this, I'm sharing my thought on that. When we are reading biographies, we are acquiring a knowledge they have acquired in decades. So we, yeah. So that is the one important point I would like to share with you, is that read more biographies and acquire more knowledge. The eminent, the legends, they've gone through the crisis, they've gone through the success, failures, that we are acquiring their inferences in 30 days maximum, reading a book. So that is one point, one thought I would like to share with you all. And the thrive through the crisis, it's a very important, and we need to understand how we need to navigate our life, our career through all kind of difficulties. I think this book, we must read this book and acquire all these inputs, and we need to practice, we need to learn, and we need to preach the learnings what we are getting through the books to the others.
Thank you, Ajesh, for sharing your views. I think Anil sir's connection has dropped off. So, I mean, in the interest of time, I'll request people who want to come in rather than me going through the list. I know, because I know almost everybody on the list. So if I call out, then we might kind of lose time. So we still have maybe, Doctor, we can go on to
Anish, Anish, I was,
yes.
I wanted to connect with
Please,
what Joseph read from Pallab about mismatch of aspirations and competence. So one of the things in that context, what I feel is there is also a deeper level of disconnect. People are feeling disconnect from themselves in this process. With the social media is, as you said, it is not really, it doesn't meet the needs. It's only disconnects. So what needs to be done is, when HR needs to look at am I really connected with myself? The first place to begin is there, that disconnect. And disconnect with, so if I'm connected with myself, then I'm connected with other people, I'm connected with the world around me, including the nature, the whole cosmos. So this is where, from the perspective, I think HR need to look at, when we look at development, not piecemeal, not offering a training program, but in terms of where does that connect can happen. How can you help people to connect with themselves? and connect
Wonderful.
with everything around.
Thank you, sir. So beautifully put. Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Joseph, I think we have maybe just about time for the epilogue piece, and then maybe some closing remarks from all our and from George sir and Vivek sir after this, maybe the epilogue. We have what, about 6 minutes or so. So,
yeah, I don't know if I'll be able to run through it in a jiffy, but I'll just make mention. Maybe I'll skip a few sentences in between, etc.
Sure.
All right. So the epilogue contains what you might say is my meta reflection after writing all the chapters. Okay, and there are a couple of let's say subheadings under that, and this subheading is Walter Mischel and person situation interaction as phenomenon. So I'll just read a little bit about that, and then probably hand it over back to you. Okay.
Sure.
So perhaps the influence of the situation or the environment on behavior was known to Aroon. This is Mr. Aroon Joshi, another illustrious chapter you must read. Still alive, the oldest profile still alive with us. Menezes, George Menezes, who passed away, and Pallab, since their exposure to NTL schools of thought, primarily Lewinian, Kurt Lewin, and the symbolic representation of behavior is equal to a function of situation into person. For Kunnath, the world assumes a more idiographic inner locus of control worldview. Kunnath took radically whole situations into himself as a consummate empath, whether at the Mahindra & Mahindra learning classroom or at the chief human resources officer vantage point. For Vivek, there's a sense of injustice in a one-size-fits-all behaviorism. Behaviorism in the social world as an extended form of regularity of Newtonian physical laws is now well recognized. Hence, a reductionist overreach of the competency approach to employee behavior was not easy picking for Vivek. Neither was justice to be deemed delivered by organization stricture or diktat, because natural justice, audi alterem partem, implied that the other side must be heard too. But once heard, Patwardhan's incisive discernment could least betray his values for justice and fair play that he would defend at great cost to his own self. It is in Ranjan's profile, however, that Mischel stands virtually at a turning point for the choices Wipro was guided to in terms of psychometric assessments. His pertinent discrimination was to depart from trait-based assessments and the type-based ones, running contrary to their commercial spread and seductive industry trends. His principles anchored him in Mischel's theoretical overlap with Henry Murray's neat press theory. That's guided Ranjan to the investments Wipro would make in psychometric assessment. He also recognized that role-based competencies were an allowance for situations to play their emergent part in terms of expectations on the position. And yet, the rank outsider to the profession meant that he would bring to bear a rarefied perspective to the HR profession with the finesse of an original marketer, with segments of populace defined perhaps as Marvins, senders, or connectors. Discovering such tipping points of influence on the fly was Ranjan's delight. Mischel's theory of social cognition, however, needs to be read with Albert Bandura's self-efficacy construct in reflective epilogue of the 6 profiles here. Self-efficacy is a special form of expectancy, our beliefs about our own effectiveness. Did the people profiled here feel able to measure up to the requirements in their situations? What if they did? Would they be considered self-efficacious? What if they did not? The poser for us here is to unearth between the lines if, despite the odds, these people projected a hope and optimism beyond their own conceptions of possibility, And if they did so, what larger purpose were they in service of? If people like Kunnath and Vivek owned up to the consequences of their choices, did they unintentionally signal a hard to achieve idealism? That they owned up to the consequence of their choices is a discreet knowing, however. So, I just wanted to lay for you that I have analyzed all the profiles through particular lenses in the epilogue. And that's something that both academicians and practitioners would find benefit from. By the way, this is the book, and these are the various notations that I made for this particular session. So over to you, Anish.
Wonderful. I think I will just go around to see if there is some reflections some of the attendees would want to bring in. We are kind of in the nick of time as well. So, see, to me, okay, let me just see if Ajesh, you want to come back again? I can see Joseph John. That would be JJ, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, it's been like ages since I've interacted. I think last time was in 2004, and we had the Wipro, all Wipro meet Horizon. Hi, JJ, great to have you.
Hey, hi. Hi, Anish. Hi, good evening.
Do you, would you want to bring in? Hi, great to see you. How are you doing?
I joined, I'm doing good. I joined a little late into the program, so that's why I didn't want to make any comments, maybe, so
no,
I might have missed quite a bit. But, so whatever I could hear in the last maybe 20 minutes, I think it is very, very interesting. And I'm sure it will be useful for a lot of people. Personally, I haven't read this book, but I'm going to read the book. I'm sure it will be useful for a lot of professionals. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you. So, to me, it's a beginning of sorts from here, and I'm conscious of my responsibility as well to take this across. And I'm very, very excited. I have to extend my special sense of gratitude and thanks to all of you who have come in, and of course to the author in particular for connecting me to this kind of ocean of knowledge by these personalities that have graced this thing today. So with the technology that I have learned and connected to in the last decade or so, I will kind of ensure that I strive to make sure that this history and the connections, and I'm sure I'm requesting the help from all of you all who've joined as well, and maybe spread this knowledge so that more youngsters who would want to get into this, very, very glorifying, glorious career in the HR field now, but with the COVID also bringing up, I would say, kind of a booster dose to all of us, and a much needed attention in some quarters. We would look forward to this journey ahead with each one of you. And let me end by saying a big, huge thank you to Vivek sir and George sir, who's consented to join. And I'm looking forward to catching up with George sir in his farm pretty soon. Maybe within Kerala we can travel, so we're excited to do that soon. And thank you to everyone who joined and took part in this. So it was a kind of a giving back piece for us as SS Consulting as well. We've been around for about 6 years now, and we wanted to bring in, and it was through the interaction with my last company that I connected with Dr. Joseph George, and with Ajesh and others. I've been speaking about these gems of HR depth that we have all across India. We have to get them to Kerala and introduce people of Kerala to these gems, and I'm glad that we could, thanks to all the technology and the internet supported well. So thanks once again. Doctor, do you want to bring in any final author remarks?
Yeah, my special thanks to both Mr. Vivek and Mr. George Kunnath, who respond so spontaneously. You know, I don't know what to say in that sense, that they are still wanting to extend their sharing in spite of giving hours and hours of interview, hours and hours of review of the drafts. They're willing to be read for who they are, and they're willing to be heard for what's coming up in them, even in this moment. So my thanks to them. My thanks also to a very silent contributor here today, Radhika, because she's been doing a lot of the back end things, so I don't want to miss that out. So thank you, Radhika, too.
Pleasure.
And thank you. And although Mr. Kunnath is in Kerala, I'd like readers to know, or the audience to know, that Mr. Vivek Patwardhan had a very special incident that's featured in the book. That's in Kochi. So I'm keeping a bit of mystery there.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay.
And it's another thing that he kind of went through without knowing what to expect. But you know, the goodness of human nature won over. What do you say, Mr. Vivek Patwardhan?
Wonderful.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
That's so much for me.
Thank you. I enjoyed this. Thank you very much.
Thank you once again. Have a great evening ahead. Thanks once again for all of you for joining. Really, really excited to sign this off and then wait for the next steps on this one now. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Many thanks, everybody,
Bye.
for being here today. Many thanks.